What happens when one of hip-hop's most outspoken fathers finally says, enough? Because this time, T.I. didn't just clap back online or throw subliminal bars. He completely snapped after Charleston White publicly disrespected his son, crossing a line that many say should never be crossed. What was said was so reckless, so personal, that it forced T.I. to respond in a way we've never seen before. And the fallout? It's exposing deep tensions about family, clout chasing, and how far controversy has gone in today's culture. Stay locked in, because once you hear what Charleston actually said, everything changes. So let's slow this down and really break it apart, because this situation didn't explode out of nowhere. Over the past few years, Charleston White has built a reputation for saying the most outrageous, disrespectful, and inflammatory things possible, especially about celebrities, street culture, and other people's families. Some people call it raw truth. Others call it clout chasing at its worst. But this time, the conversation shifted when his words dragged T.I.'s son into the spotlight. T.I., a Grammy-winning rapper, entrepreneur, and outspoken advocate for family values, has always made it clear that his children are off limits. He's argued publicly, defended them in interviews, and even admitted when he felt he went too far as a parent. But despite all that, Charleston White still chose to target his son in a very public, very disrespectful way. In this video, we're going to walk through exactly what Charleston White said, why it crossed a serious line, and how T.I. finally reached his breaking point. We'll look at the history between these two, the pattern behind Charleston's behavior, and the deeper cultural issue behind why disrespect has become currency online. And stick with me, because later on we'll get to the moment that made people say, yeah, T.I. is done playing nice. To understand why this situation exploded the way it did, you have to understand who Charleston White is and how he operates. Charleston didn't rise to fame through music, sports, or traditional media. He built his platform almost entirely off controversy. His brand is shock value. He says things most people would never dare to say out loud, especially about street culture, rappers, and their families. Over the years, he's openly admitted that he uses outrage as a strategy. The more people get angry, the more his clips go viral. He's insulted dead rappers, mocked victims of violence, and disrespected entire communities, all while claiming he's exposing hypocrisy or telling uncomfortable truths. And while some fans praise him for being real, others believe he deliberately crosses moral lines just to stay relevant. But here's where things take a darker turn. Charleston didn't just aim his words at T.I. this time, he aimed them at T.I.'s son. That's a completely different level of disrespect in hip-hop culture and in real life. Criticize a man's career, his past decisions, or even his public statements, and many celebrities will shrug it off. But when children are involved, especially in a public and humiliating way, that's when things become personal. According to multiple clips circulating online, Charleston made remarks that questioned T.I.'s parenting, mocked his son's behavior, and implied things that many viewers felt were not only disrespectful, but dangerous. People weren't just offended, they were shocked. Even some of Charleston's usual supporters admitted that this felt like he went too far. What made it worse was the tone. It wasn't framed as criticism or concern. It was delivered with sarcasm, insults, and a sense of entertainment, like someone poking a bear just to see what would happen next. And that's when the internet realized something important. Charleston wasn't just talking anymore. He was provoking. Now here's the part that really matters. T.I. had been silent up until this point. No immediate response, no subtweets, no Instagram Live, nothing. And for people who know T.I.'s history, that silence was louder than any rant. Because when T.I. goes quiet, it usually means he's processing, not ignoring. And as the clips continued to spread, as blogs picked it up, and as fans started tagging T.I. directly, pressure started to build. People weren't just asking if he would respond. They were asking how he would respond. Would he take the high road? Would he ignore it? Or would this finally be the moment where T.I. snapped? Because behind the public image, behind the polished interviews and business ventures, there's still a father watching another man publicly disrespect his child for clicks. Now, this is where the situation really heats up, because once you strip away the reactions, the opinions, and the think pieces, it all comes back to the words themselves. What exactly did Charleston White say that made so many people, including neutral observers, say, nah, this ain't it? In multiple interviews and live stream clips that started circulating rapidly, Charleston didn't just reference T.I.'s son in passing. He repeatedly brought him up as part of a larger rant about celebrity parenting, street influence, and what he claims are the consequences of rappers glorifying certain lifestyles. On the surface, he tried to frame his comments as social commentary, but the way he delivered them told a very different story. Charleston mocked the young man's public image, questioned his upbringing, and suggested that T.I. had failed as a father. He implied that T.I.'s son was a product of hypocrisy, someone raised with privilege, but flirting with street credibility. And while debates about celebrity kids and accountability happen all the time, Charleston's language went beyond critique. He used insults, he used humiliation, and he used the child as a prop to make his point louder. That's why people reacted so strongly. In hip-hop culture especially, children are considered off-limits. There's an unspoken rule that no matter how intense the beef gets, families stay out of it. That rule exists because once kids are involved, things can escalate in real life very quickly. And many fans felt Charleston ignored that boundary on purpose. Even more concerning to some viewers was the potential impact of those comments. T.I.'s son is still growing up in the public eye, already dealing with the pressure of having famous parents. Being publicly ridiculed by a controversial figure with millions of followers isn't just disrespectful, it can be damaging. Mental health advocates online were quick to point out that words like these don't just disappear once the clip ends. And here's where things get even messier. Charleston doubled down. Instead of walking the comments back or clarifying his intentions, he leaned into the backlash. He reposted clips, laughed at reactions, and essentially treated the outrage as proof that his strategy was working. That move alone shifted public opinion further against him. People started saying this wasn't about truth anymore, it was about attention. Meanwhile, blogs picked up the story. Reaction channels started dissecting every sentence, and fans began tagging T.I. nonstop, demanding a response. But what really pushed this into dangerous territory was how some viewers interpreted Charleston's remarks. A few legal analysts online suggested that certain statements could be seen as defamatory or intentionally provocative in a way that invites harm. Whether that holds up legally is debatable, but the perception alone added fuel to the fire. And throughout all of this, T.I. was watching. No response, no clarification, just silence. But behind that silence, something was clearly building, because those close to T.I. have said before that while he can tolerate disrespect aimed at him, anything involving his kids hits differently. He's spoken openly about his role as a father, his mistakes, and his efforts to protect his children from the worst parts of fame. So when people started asking, why hasn't T.I. responded yet? Others answered with something far more chilling. They said, he's not figuring out what to say. He's figuring out how far he's willing to go. To really understand why this situation escalated so fast, you have to look at T.Y.'s past, especially when it comes to his family. This wasn't just another celebrity getting mad over internet chatter. This hit a nerve that's been exposed before, and anyone who's followed T.I. for years knows he takes fatherhood very seriously, sometimes even controversially so. T.I. has always been vocal about his role as a parent. He's talked openly about raising his kids in the spotlight, admitting that fame brings privileges, but also constant judgment. Every move his children make gets dissected online, and that pressure alone has already caused public debates about his parenting style. From interviews to podcasts, T.I. has defended his choices, acknowledged his mistakes, and made it clear that protecting his children is non-negotiable. We've seen this play out before. When people criticized his son for trying to live up to the street image associated with his father's music, T.I. addressed it head on. He didn't deny that his son was influenced by his surroundings, but he pushed back against the idea that outsiders had the right to define or shame his child. In multiple interviews, he said that raising kids isn't about perfection, it's about guidance, accountability, and growth. So when Charleston White came along and publicly mocked his son, it wasn't just an insult. It felt like a repeat attack on something T.I. has already had to defend over and over again. But here's the part many people overlook. T.I. has shown restraint before. There have been plenty of moments where people disrespected him, challenged his credibility, or questioned his past. In many of those cases, he either ignored it or addressed it calmly. That's important because it shows this reaction wasn't impulsive. It was layered. What made this different was the combination of public humiliation, repeated commentary, and the way Charleston framed his remarks as entertainment. For T.I., that crossed from criticism into exploitation. It wasn't about a debate anymore. It was about using a young man's name and image as clickbait. Fans started pulling up old clips where T.I. explicitly warned that his children were off limits. In one interview, he said that while he understands the nature of the internet, there's a line that shouldn't be crossed when it comes to family. Those clips resurfacing only made the situation more intense, because now it looked like Charleston ignored a clear boundary on purpose. And then there's the cultural aspect. In hip-hop, respect isn't just about words. It's about understanding consequences. T.I. comes from an era where disrespecting someone's family wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. Even if times have changed and beefs now play out on social media instead of the streets, that mentality doesn't disappear overnight. That's why many fans weren't surprised when they sensed T.I. was reaching his limit. People close to the situation began hinting that T.I. was furious behind the scenes, not reckless, not emotional online, but angry in a controlled way. The kind of anger that doesn't show itself immediately, but when it does, it's deliberate. And here's the chilling part. Charleston White seemed aware of all this and still kept talking. Some viewers believe he wanted that exact reaction, a public snap, a viral explosion, a moment that would drag T.I. into the chaos and keep the spotlight firmly on him. But what Charleston may not have anticipated was how calculated T.Y.'s response would be. After days of silence, nonstop tagging, and growing outrage, the moment finally came when T.I. broke his silence. And what immediately stood out wasn't yelling, threats, or theatrics. It was the tone. Calm, direct, and unmistakably serious. That alone made people lean in because this didn't sound like a man chasing a viral moment. It sounded like a father drawing a hard boundary. In his response, T.I. made it clear that criticism of him is fair game. He acknowledged that he's lived a public life, made mistakes, and accepted scrutiny as part of the territory. But he drew a sharp line when it came to his children. He emphasized that dragging a young person into online controversy for clicks is reckless and irresponsible, especially when that young person didn't ask to be part of the conversation. What really shifted the atmosphere was how specific T.I. was. He didn't speak in vague generalities. He addressed the behavior directly, calling out the pattern of using shock value and disrespect as entertainment. Without naming every insult word for word, he made it clear that he knew exactly what was said and why it was unacceptable. That detail alone told viewers this response was thought out, not emotional. And then came the part that made people stop joking. I explained that when public figures normalize disrespect toward people's families, especially children, it creates real-world consequences. He talked about how words travel, how clips get clipped out of context, and how young people are left to deal with the fallout long after the internet moves on. It wasn't just a clap back. It was a warning about responsibility. Fans immediately noticed something else. There was no attempt to humiliate Charleston White the way Charleston had humiliated others. No name-calling, no mockery. Instead, T.I. positioned himself as someone who had reached his limit but was still in control. That contrast made the response hit harder because it removed any sense that this was just internet beef. Social media reactions flipped almost instantly. People who had been laughing at the situation suddenly started saying things like, "Nah, he's serious," and "this ain't content anymore." Even some creators who previously defended Charleston admitted that T.I.'s response exposed the darker side of chasing attention at any cost. But here's where the tension escalated even further. Instead of backing down, Charleston White reacted to T.I.'s response in a way that surprised a lot of people. Rather than apologizing or de-escalating, he treated T.I.'s seriousness as proof that he'd struck a nerve. He continued talking, framing the entire exchange as validation of his platform. And that's when the narrative changed from a one-sided controversy into a full-blown cultural debate. Was Charleston exercising free speech, or was he hiding behind it to avoid accountability? Was T.I. overreacting, or was he doing what many parents wish they could do when their children are publicly disrespected? Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Some people argued that if celebrity kids live publicly, they're open to critique. Others pushed back hard, saying critique is one thing, disrespect is another. The line between commentary and cruelty became the center of the conversation. And while all of this played out online, one thing became increasingly clear. T.I. wasn't interested in dragging this out for entertainment. His response felt final, like a statement meant to be heard once and understood clearly, which left many people wondering what would happen next. Once T.I. spoke, there was no going back to business as usual. The internet didn't move on the next day like it usually does. Instead, the conversation expanded, and what started as a clash between two personalities turned into a much bigger debate about boundaries, accountability, and the price of viral fame. Major blogs and hip-hop platforms picked up the story almost immediately. Headlines weren't just about Charleston White anymore, they were about the line he crossed. Reaction videos flooded YouTube, with creators breaking down T.I.'s response frame by frame, analyzing his tone, his wording, and what it signaled. Many agreed on one thing. This wasn't a man looking for clicks. This was a father speaking from experience. Fans rallied behind T.I. in large numbers. Comment sections filled with parents saying they understood his frustration, even if they didn't always agree with his past decisions. The common theme was simple. Criticizing an adult is fair, but dragging someone's child into public ridicule is different. That message resonated far beyond hip-hop. At the same time, Charleston White continued doing what he's always done, posting, reacting, and reframing the backlash as proof that he was winning. But something felt different this time. The laughter wasn't as loud, the support wasn't as unified. Even some longtime followers started questioning whether the constant shock value was worth the damage it caused. This moment also exposed a larger cultural problem. In today's internet economy, attention equals money. The most extreme voices often get rewarded, not because they're right, but because they're loud. Controversy spreads faster than context, and outrage often outperforms nuance. Charleston White didn't create that system, but he's learned how to exploit it. T.I.'s response forced people to ask whether that system has gone too far. Another key takeaway was how generational differences played into the reaction. Older hip-hop fans largely sided with T.I., pointing to long-standing codes of respect. Younger audiences were more divided, some arguing that nothing is off-limits online. That clash revealed how social media has blurred lines that used to be clear. But here's the part that may matter most. This wasn't just about two men arguing. It was about a young person being turned into content without consent. That reality made people uncomfortable, and discomfort is often the first step toward change. Whether that change actually happens remains to be seen, but the conversation itself was unavoidable. As for T.I., he hasn't continued the back and forth, and that silence speaks volumes. It suggests he said what he needed to say and walked away, refusing to turn his family into ongoing entertainment. That decision alone earned him respect, even from critics. So the real question now isn't who won this exchange. The real question is what happens next. Will creators rethink how far they're willing to go for attention? Will audiences stop rewarding disrespect with views? Or will this moment fade like so many others, replaced by the next controversy? One thing is certain. When Charleston White publicly disrespected T.I.'s son, he didn't just spark a reaction. He exposed a fault line in online culture, and T.I.'s response made it clear that some lines, no matter how viral crossing them might be, still shouldn't be crossed. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell me where you stand on this. Do you think anything should be off limits for content, or is everything fair game online? Hit that like button if you appreciate deep breakdowns like this, subscribe for more real conversations on trending topics, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.